This really has been a victory for Narendra Modi since he took office. It's been quite a highlight.
Yeah, we know there's been a huge amount of criticism for Modi over the sluggishness, the pace of reforms that were promised. Remember, he took to office in 2014 with the biggest mandate in 30 years in India. This is a key centerpiece to his reform agenda. What it essentially promises to do is, at the moment, India's got at least 17 different levies when it comes to sales and consumption taxes. This aims to create a single tax taxed at consumption as opposed to multiple times at different points of production as it happens now. It aims to create a single market of about 1.3 billion increasingly wealthy consumers. It does still need some steps to take place before it can be actually ratified and enacted, but this is seen as a positive for India given the pace of reforms and how long it's taken. It was proposed a decade ago. And in fact, interestingly, the opposition Congress Party, which first proposed it back in 2006, they then blocked it, mainly because Modi, when he was head of Gujarat state, he actually blocked it as well. So there's been a lot of political infighting, but it looks like it's on track.
Yeah, no doubt. I was talking to Harsha Subramaniam yesterday saying this is really going to help political mileage or give him some mileage for the prime minister. So overall, though, who looks to benefit the most out of this now?
Well, as you say, the political mileage, right, but also perception of the international investor community. There was so much sort of high hopes for India. It's the fastest growing economy. It's a great consumer story, but the concern is that the pace of reforms, the opening up of the market to the outside, which was one of the platforms that Modi took to office with in 2014 when he went on that road trip, you know, Rockstart Modi selling India, Make in India, that has been sort of derailed a little bit. So the credibility of the Indian reform agenda, HSBC saying that this is the poster child of the reform agenda and pushing it through is going to give a major boost to the perception of credibility when it comes to Indian economic reforms. Equities, take a look at how they've benefited. We're looking at the closest sort of these highest levels since August 2015, and that is the surge we've seen on expectations that perhaps we're going to get this passed. Remember, the rupee, Indian equities, that rout last year was one of the worst performers in both currencies and equities globally last year, following that rout in China, of course. We're also looking at companies being able to benefit, logistics companies in particular. There's been a big sort of reaction from foreign and domestic companies, Walmart, Microsoft, PwC coming out and saying that, you know, all of this is a very good thing. Betty?
Heidi, so obstacles, though, still remain, right?
Yeah, it's not quite a done deal yet. There's a few months at least of wrangling. It needs support of at least 50% of the states to be ratified. It also needs to be passed by the lower house. The good news is that Modi does have control of the lower house, so that should be seen to go through. The other thing that's the unknown, exactly what this tax will look like. We're looking at somewhere around 18%. That's according to Modi's top economic advisor and the main opposition Congress Party. They want to cap it at 18%. Some states want a higher rate of around 22%. Just for comparison, the median for OECD countries is about 20%. So it goes from everywhere to 5 to 27%. As a result, we could see a short-term spike in inflation. But interestingly, Finance Minister Arun Jaitley saying that all of this could add up to 2 percentage points to India's GDP.
India making a move to transform into a common market. In a victory for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, lawmakers approved a goods and services tax on Wednesday. It aims to streamline India's fragmented tax system by implementing one single rate. The country's state-by-state tax codes have been discouraging the expansion of business across state borders. Still, strategists warn the tax could shake up the economy in the short term, disrupting consumption and growth. The level of impact would depend on the standard goods and services tax rate. The bottom line, India is trying to fix its tangled tax system.
Now, India is already the world's fastest growing big economy. Yes, faster than China. And now it's reforming to turbocharge that growth even more. Parliament's voted to sweep away its complicated multi-layered tax system and replace it with a unified goods and services tax, so long as the state governments agree, of course. Well, this is a huge step for India, as Yolo Abdafid explains.
India's economy, like its population, keeps growing. The country's value in terms of what it produces increased 7.6% in the last financial year. Wednesday's vote to introduce one service and goods tax throughout India has cross-party support and is seen as one of the biggest reforms since 2014 in Narendra Modi's time as Prime Minister.
Except one political party, everybody else has supported this bill. everybody has voted in favor of the bill, and almost every state government is on board in order to implement one of the most important taxation reforms in India itself.
If ratified, India's unified goods and service tax would replace a patchwork of federal and state tax on goods. Currently, 1.3 billion consumers across India are charged with 17 different state and federal levies on moving goods. A new tax rate could be fixed across the country, but that won't be announced for a few months yet, nor how much compensation for loss of revenue could be paid to India's western states in the future. But Wednesday's significant vote in the upper house shows there's strong support for the plan, especially if it'll boost the economy.
We will see one of the greatest tax reforms in the country, and it simplifies the tax structure. Instead of multi-phase tax, it will be a one single point tax. It will be a single rate that we will probably move towards over a period of time. So it's an entire taxation architecture which makes it simple, but very importantly it also makes India into one market, a unified one market.
India has an increasingly diverse economy, but despite the political agreement, there could still be several pitfalls to create a more integrated economy.
The pitfalls in the beginning would be more of political. This has to go through another 3 to 4 layers of approvals, including, the federal states have to approve. So the major pitfall would be, a lot of obstacles, which again, the implementation would face in the next 2 years.
A lot of details still need to be agreed, like the structure of the tax rate and which goods will be exempt. Yolo Aptavid, TRT World.
Well, Sunil Kanoria is the president of the Associated Chambers of Commerce and Industry of India. He joins me now from Calcutta. Sunil, thank you very much for joining us on Money Talk. Just bring this down to really basic terms here. How will ordinary Indians benefit from these reforms?
I think basically what would happen through the simplification and unification of the tax, the cascading impact of tax which was there, the multiplicity of taxes which was there in the country, the federal and the state levels, all that will get rationalized, and therefore it would have an impact on the final pricing to the consumer. Yes, there would be certain products where the cost will go up, the goods and services in certain areas would go up, the cost may go up marginally, but there will be many where it will come down. So therefore it will get rationalized, the simplicity would happen, and across the value chain, right from the producer to the consumer, there will be much more simplification and a lot more people will come into the tax regime.
So the ordinary consumer will see more products coming down in price than going up in price. Is that right in a word?
I agree with you.
Okay. Now, it's supposed to boost the economy. How is it going to do that?
I think what would happen is there is a lot of goods and services which doesn't even come into the tax net today. Because of the GST, with the rationalization and simplification of the tax, what would happen is that transactions would come into the regime. So you would have a lot more overall people paying the taxes. The revenue, the government would go up per se. The leakage which is happening in the system will get reduced. A lot more money and resources would be available for the development of the country also.
Okay, so the government is going to be collecting more tax revenue as a result of this overhaul. Just as an aside, is it true that roughly 1% of Indians pay income tax?
That's right.
Well, that is a stunning figure, but this will presumably improve that.
Absolutely. It will improve substantially, especially with the technology, with the e-commerce coming and all. People would find it much more easier and accessible.
Okay, Sunil, let me ask you, if this is going to be everyone is a winner situation, why did it take so long to bring it into effect, or very nearly to bring it into effect?
You see, there was an issue when historically the state and the federal, there's a fight always between the state and the center. State does not want to let go its authority of being able to decide a tax rate, decides its whom and how they want to collect the taxes. Secondly, because different states in the country have a different economic environment, say for example in the western parts of the country, the manufacturing is much more, so they have a much higher tax collection, whereas in the eastern part of India, it is more of consumers. You have population, but not that much of manufacturing. Right. So in the past, the equality was not there where people were residing. And because GST is a consumption tax, it will be dependent upon where people are there and how much people consume, based on which the revenues for those states will get emerged. And therefore, there were certain states, they would lose some revenue in the shorter term. So these were one factor. And secondly, of course, was a political factor whereby when Congress was in power, BJP did not want the Congress to take an upper hand. And now when BJP was in power, Congress didn't want to get them to take a shot. And therefore, there were political issues.
You mentioned some of the states are going to lose out. This is a final question to you. I just want to make this final point. So some states will lose out. The final hurdle for these reforms is going to be to get through at least half of those states agreeing with it. Will this set of reforms pass, do you think?
I think there could be a little challenge and delay, but I think ultimately because all the parties are represented in the central level also and they have agreed to it, and especially it is either a state is run by a Congress or a BJP or a regional party, and all have voted for it. So I don't expect that kind of a challenge. It may take a little more time, but it would happen.
So we could see it coming into effect by April, yes or no?
We are hopeful. We will keep our fingers crossed because we're already in August.
Okay.
A lot of work done, but let's hope that.
Sunil Kanoria, thank you very much for joining us on Money Talks. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
The idea of a country essentially creating a free trade area with itself sounds counterintuitive or sounds surprising. Are there further examples of what can be done to harmonize the different regions economically once the GST is fully established in place, or is this kind of the end of that?
This is the vast majority of it, rules-wise. I think another big step that will take longer that's not really a reform to help integrate India economically is simply infrastructure. Depending on where you are in the country, the connectivity to the rest of the country is quite bad. That's both for transporting either people or goods. So as those infrastructure linkages improve, and that kind of investment is a big part of the government's agenda, you should see more economic integration over time.
So it took Modi a while to get this GST tax passed. What did he have to give up to get that done? And will that hurt his standing or his supporters' standing in the local elections and the national elections?
So actually, I would argue the GST has been running on a different track because it's been less of a partisan issue and more of a federalism issue with the center and the states debating. And that's across all parties, no matter what party is ruling at the state level. But I think it's also important to address this issue that the GST is now done. It is not done yet. There are a number of steps that need to be taken yet to bring us to implementation. Implementation itself could take quite some time, and that's why economic analysts are talking about, you get these economic gains, but they're only after several years. The Parliament has now, both houses of Parliament have now approved the constitutional amendment. It needs to be approved by the President. GST Council with state finance ministers needs to be formed to set crucial issues like the rate and how it's administered. And then it goes back down to the states. The states have to ratify the constitutional amendment. The central government has to pass detailed implementation legislation, and each state government has to pass its own detailed implementation legislation. Then the IT network needed to administer the tax nationally needs to be rolled out. So you can see there's quite a number of steps that still need to be taken in order to make GST a reality on the ground.
But you said that land purchases and labor, sort of universal labor laws are something that you don't think Modi will accomplish. Why is that so difficult?
It's so difficult. On the land acquisition side, you saw the government do a concerted effort to get more liberal rules passed early last year and immediately ran into the problem of getting accused of being anti-farmer. And politically, that's a big problem in India, given that agriculture still accounts for roughly 50% of employment and as many as 70% of people still live in rural areas. And even some of the BJP's own allies and people within the party itself started to oppose the measure because it was simply so unpopular. So that got dropped unceremoniously near the end of last year. On the labor law reform side, one of the big barriers to companies scaling up in India has been restrictive labor laws that mean companies over a certain size need government permission to lay off workers, permission that doesn't come particularly frequently or in a timely manner. So one of the changes that have been proposed is to kind of raise that cap and otherwise ameliorate those restrictions. Run into implacable oppositions from unions around the country across sectors. And those unions, less power than they used to have in India, but still very, very powerful in the ability to bring a lot of people out into the streets. It's very hard for the government to defend itself against accusations of being anti-worker when it tries to push those kinds of reforms.
राज्य मंत्री स्वतंत्र प्रभार श्री विजय गोयल, युवा स्वतंत्र प्रभार खेल राज्य मंत्री, जल संसाधन, नदी विकास एवं गंगा।
Up in, let me see, about 20 minutes' time. But now I want to turn to India. The parliament there has agreed to implement a goods and service tax, claimed to be the biggest tax reform since independence. Now it's planned to integrate India economically, and this is the slogan: one nation, one tax, one marketplace. Here's Shilpa Kannan in Delhi with that story.
Voting time starts now.
10 years in the making, and after hours of final debate, this is the moment Indian politicians voted for the country's most revolutionary tax change since independence. But while all eyes are on Parliament, it's places like this that will really feel the impact. Making tools for India's auto sector, this firm employs dozens of people just to file the paperwork associated with countless taxes. The new system should make that a thing of the past, letting it use staff more productively.
Well, a lot of our time is wasted in all these things. Paperwork, collecting forms, there's no point wasting so much of energy in all these things. It's better to do something fruitful which gives your business a boost, pick up on sales. Yes, it will, and definitely it will reduce costs.
Products made in one state in India get taxed multiple times before they reach the consumer in another corner of the country, which means delays and added costs. So experts say GST will be a welcome change.
So it will be definitely better than what the current regime is. There will be efficiency for industry, especially in the case of manufacturing and several sectors. So fundamentally, I believe there will be change, there will be efficiency. The degree of efficiency is what we'll have to wait and see as the law unveils.
Now it's down to working out the nitty-gritty details, and at the same time, a huge IT system will need setting up and tax collectors will require training. For companies too, it'll mean an overhauling of the business processes. So this is just the beginning of the biggest tax reform India has ever attempted. Shilpa Kannan, BBC News, Delhi.
The saying, money makes the world go round, probably has been around since, well, the creation of money. But that's probably not the case in India, especially for furniture maker Vivek Mehra. To him, if there's anything money does effectively in India, it actually slows down business. He blames the government's use of an antiquated, multi-layered and confusing tax system to raise money. It's a jumble of strategies by federal and local governments. It's common to have a product taxed several times before it hits the market.
Right now what's happening is my Rajasthan company is billing to my Delhi company. From my Delhi company, I may be billing to some middleman, and then he's billing to the consumer. So they're like 4 times the taxes are being paid on the same product.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi seized on that frustration during his push for power and made it one of the centerpieces of his campaign. He vowed to throw out the patchwork tax system and replace it with a goods and services tax. It took Modi more than 2 years to get the GST approved. That's no small feat, since Parliament is actually dominated by a rival party.
Through GST, we will see one of the greatest tax reforms in the country. And it simplifies the tax structure. Instead of multi-phase tax, it will be a one single point tax. It will be a single rate that we will probably move towards over a period of time. So it's an entire taxation architecture which makes it simple, but very importantly, it also makes India into one market, a unified one market.
Some of the most influential business groups claim it could add as much as 2 percentage points to the country's yearly growth rate. That could help India, which is already the fastest growing major economy in the world, pull further ahead. Still, others are tempering expectations.
Most of the people are confused because nobody still doesn't know that what is going to finally happen. So till the time it comes, it will take some time for everybody to get the gist of it, what it's going to be like.
The GST bill still has to be approved by at least half of India's 29 states. The government is hoping to implement it by April of next year, but even that may be a bit too optimistic. A new tax arrangement means training for tax officials, overhauling the country's IT systems, and getting used to the new changes. Ahmad Ku, CCTV.
For more on India's goods and services tax and the future of the economy under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, I spoke to Peter Colley. He's Chief Investment Officer at DMS Funds. I asked him why the GST is such a big deal.
In India, they have so many different taxations that are levied both by states and local authorities that it's a complete and utter mess. And so what the GST is supposed to do is to get rid of all those taxes, with the exception of a couple, and have just one flat tax of between 12 and 18%.
Now, Modi actually hailed the passage of this bill as a great step by Team India, a great step towards transformation and better transparency. So some people are wondering about the timing. Why now?
Well, actually, I've been rather critical of the Modi government recently because they should have. The GST tax has been floundering for the last 9 years, and it's never got anywhere because politics has got in the way. And so I wrote an article in which I was very critical of Mr. Modi because he was elected with a large mandate to change the status quo. And I said you must pass this legislation to prove to investors, especially foreign investors, that you have the clout that you say you have. And that's why it was so important to do, especially in his first term, because we do have elections coming up in about, what, 2 years, a couple of years.
So then with that being said, I mean, at one point Modi, when he was in the lower houses of government, he was actually opposed to this and now has kind of changed his tune. He said once he got that experience and now sees it differently. But does all the blame fall on Modi's shoulders for the time that it took to get to this point?
Well, no, as I said just a second ago, it's politics. Politics got in the way, and it's horrible. And I wrote about this, and I said, that nobody seems to be doing the right thing for the population. It's if the opposition party proposes something that may be very good for the Indian population, just because the opponents had suggested the governing party would say no, just a knee-jerk reaction, and that's what happens, and it's ridiculous. So, yes, Mr. Modi may have been against it, but now he's for it. And he should have been for it, and everybody should have been for it. It's a great piece of legislation.
Now, speaking of everyone being for it, let's also look at the reaction from the business community. What does this mean for doing business in India right now?
Well, what it'll do is India is totally ruled by bureaucracies. And there are two different bureaucracies, one to say yes and one to say no, so nothing gets done. And what this will do is it will eliminate a tremendous amount of bureaucracy. And then it will also cut down on things like corruption in state government level. Because what happens is, in order for a businessman to do any business there, he has to bribe somebody. And this will do away with that level of bureaucracy, as there'll be just the one taxation.
So then, with that being said, what do you think will be some of the key industries that could really benefit or perhaps really struggle because of this?
Okay. I think the industries that will benefit are pharmaceutical industries, infrastructure, manufacturing, and high tech will be the ones. The ones that, you know that there are not industries, but two products that aren't going to be taxed come under the umbrella of the GST. One is alcohol and one is tobacco, the sin taxes. That's probably because most states get about 25% of their budget from taxing those directly, so they don't want to give that up to the national government. But having said that, one of the industries, and I did just mention that would benefit, is pharmaceuticals at one level. At a different level, they have to work out the business of free medicine. Right now, as it's written, it would actually be taxed, even though it's free to people like the WHO and other people, indigenous people who can't afford the medicine. So they've got to work that out. They can't be taxed.
What does this mean for Modi and his legacy in terms of the future of India's economy?
Oh, I think that what GST will do is that it will add about 1% to GDP growth next year. Absolutely. And what it will do for his legacy is the fact that he will be perceived, especially by foreign investors, as somebody who can put the hammer down and get legislation passed. And that will bode very well for FDI in the future.
And what about the global implications beyond India? How do you think the rest of the world's going to react to this? Would it be positive? Will there be some countries that would also be considering a similar sort of streamlining of their taxes in response?
Yeah, in fact, if I remember correctly, I can't remember whether it was Malaysia or Thailand that recently implemented their own GST tax. I think that this may be the wave of the future, because it's not just in India, but it's in all countries, even developed countries, where you have VAT at different levels, you have all these different taxes. And what this will do is make India one, just like the EU, will make it one common market.